How are you doing?
I'm great.
It's fantastic.
Had some good news while we were waiting, so.
Yeah? Anything that you can share?
Well, just about my new business, Generation Tux. A gentleman that I've been talking to about investing in it has decided to invest in it, so that's always good news in a startup.
Fantastic. Let me know if you want me to invest as well. I'd be happy to contribute.
Okay.
If you can take a zero down. So you have built an incredible career, but you were just telling me outside that today is your dad's 93rd birthday.
It is.
And you guys go, well, you go far back, but you have a business that you guys kind of started together.
That's right. He doesn't remember that anymore, though. But in 1973, I was a 24-year-old young man with $7,000, and I wanted to start my own business. I wanted to be the architect of my own life. And with $7 grand, you really can't do much. So my dad banked it, and he retired a number of years ago and is very successful and lives on Long Island Sound in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Wow, wow. And so tell me about just real quickly, how has your dad influenced you?
Well, of course, he's a man that I admire greatly, and I use the word admire specifically because we're not really friends, even though at the end of his career he worked for me for about a decade. But I respect the hell out of him and admire him. And in 1975, I'd been in business 18 months, and I had lost about $100,000 in 18 months, which I wasn't even aware of. I was so naive. And he told me that I was making a mistake that so many businessmen like himself had made as well, which was that when you're in the retail business, or many businesses, until you count your inventory at the end of your fiscal year and ascertain what your shrinkage inventory that you've lost is, you don't actually know what the P&L will look like. And his advice to me was, don't be afraid to charge what you need for your product to remain in business. And that was something that I took to heart, and over the years at Men's, we had a very healthy maintained margin, much larger than what people would have imagined, having originated as a discount store.
Did you imagine Men's Wearhouse becoming what it was? Was it intentional? Did you feel like that is...
No, it was the opposite of that. When I went into business in '73, I had been a hippie and actually was probably still a hippie when I started organizing Men's Wearhouse. So I never really did it to try to make a lot of money. In fact, my original compensation at Men's Wearhouse was $600 a month. So I certainly wasn't in it to get rich. And it wasn't until about almost 15 years after the company started that I realized that it was a cookie cutter and could be opened and operated any place in the country, and therefore, through extrapolation, would be quite significant.
When did you realize that it was going to be life-changing?
Well, by life-changing, it sounds like you mean financially life-changing. I found it really life-changing in a more comprehensive sense from the moment I started the company, because for the first time in my life, I was responsible for not just myself, but for other people, and responsible for areas of business about which I knew nothing and had to learn in a hurry. It financially became viable in the late 80s, after I had gone on TV as a spokesperson and established "I guarantee it" as our catchphrase. And I realized that, wow, this would lend itself to an IPO, and probably, if your mom used to tell you that money doesn't grow on trees, that's not true if you found a company that then goes public, because you can convert your stock to cash pretty much whenever you want.
Fantastic. I can't wait. So you, I want to talk about the face of the company and your personal brand. I want to get to that. But it's interesting to me, as I was doing my research for this interview, that you were an economics major, and then you went on to be a teacher. I believe, I don't know if it was full-time teaching, but you were a teacher.
Part-time.
Part-time teaching, and then went into the retail business. Is that right?
That's right. No, I never had any desire in college. I was in college from 66 to 70. I never had any desire to train so that I could make a lot of money. And in fact, when I graduated from college, I got a job as a substitute teacher in the town next door to Ferguson, Missouri, no less. And we did have, back in 1970, a mini race riot in our school, even that far ago.
Wow. So you have now grown the personal brand of George. You started out building your personal brand on TV. Was that was it intentional?
The company had in the early 80s, the company actually had been threatened with bankruptcy. Our bank called our loan. It was not a large loan, it was $2 million. But when a bank says to you, "We'd like that back in 60 days," if you don't have it, it's fairly intimidating. But when we survived that, and I went on TV, I could see that it was going to be a very different story.
Why? Why did that change things? Putting your own personal brand out is definitely a pivotal move for any company, to put a person forward.
Well, one reason is I worked cheap, so that it didn't cost much to make the commercial. But I think the real reason was that I changed the economic model of the company, which was not performing, even though there was a macroeconomic condition that had caused the bigger problem. But our model did not work, and it was the classic retail model, where we ticketed our merchandise X and then ran promotional advertising and sold it for X minus 20%, 50%. It varied all the time. And that model is really not a good way to build a business, because you start to attract customers strictly based on getting a good deal. And without speaking out of school, my former company made that mistake when they bought Joseph Bank after they fired me, because Joseph Bank was simply a business that attracted people based on offering an extraordinary deal, buy one, get three free. There was no inherent value or integrity to the business.
How does it feel now, where you sit? You built an incredible company, incredible people. incredible personal brand. What are you looking back on and saying, I should have done this differently? I did this well. Any regrets?
I should have regrets, but I don't, and that does sometimes confuse me why I don't experience a regret at having been fired from the company I founded. It seems that you should feel regret about that, but the only regret I feel is for the 20,000 people that are still at Men's and no longer have the experience of a job that they really enjoy. But I don't really have any regrets. I now believe that if you're dealing with something that is not a health issue, that it really should not be taken too seriously, because the only thing that really matters in life is how much life you have to live. And so if it's not your health, try to keep it in its appropriate place.
If I were everybody in this audience, I would have tweeted that just now. That's an incredible line. So now what? You have an incredible brand. You've built some incredible things in your past. What's next?
Well, so I've got a company called Generation Tux, and we rent online tuxedos, but we also rent suits like the one I'm wearing, and in those that they are leading. So it is, believe it or not, it's the model of leadership that the United States military uses, I believe.
And how did you learn to lead?
On the job. I didn't learn almost anything in college. I was in college during Vietnam, so most of my time was spent trying to figure out how to end the war in Vietnam. So I learned everything on the job, and I learned leadership by being thrust into a leadership role. Here's an example back from the 70s. First time an employee ever came to me and said, I'd like to go out with somebody in our company. Is that against company policy? Well, of course, we didn't have a company policy. And so I had to respond in real time, and I said to him, look, Pat, probably okay to go out with people inside the company. And I said that because I knew that if I said otherwise, he would do it anyways. And so, you don't want to be the king that tells people that they can't enjoy themselves, right? And I said, but Pat, you got to be responsible for what happens if it doesn't work out.
You can't guarantee it?
I can't guarantee it. And just to tell you the end of this particular story, which goes back now almost 40 years, he ended up marrying this woman.
Wow.
And they both worked in the company, and they ended up getting divorced and staying in the company.
Oh.
So I learned that you can't look to a leadership book to understand leadership. You have to take the moment and then use your mind and your heart to make a decision about right and wrong.
Do you feel like that you have 4 children that will be or are in the workforce or will be entering the workforce? Do you feel like that same grit, that same challenge you were met with to not only build this company, but others that have really worked hard for businesses will receive the same on-ramp, working hard, gaining momentum?
Some of them will. My daughter is a wedding photographer in San Diego. Now, since I am sort of in the wedding business, there is a natural connection. I have resisted bringing her into the business because she's got her own business. But now that I've become clearer on what content means on our website, I am seriously thinking of bringing my daughter in because she's got that entrepreneurial jazz. My high school son, who's a junior in high school and very competitive in athletics, but not very competitive when it comes to money and career, and maybe that's because he was raised with much.
Yeah, every child's different, I can tell you that. I'm curious as well how you created momentum during the course of your career. You were hit with so many stumbling blocks as again recently. It seems like you have had some really big successes, but also some really big challenges. But you kept that momentum going. How did you do that?
Well, I like to, this doesn't directly address your question on momentum, but the subtitle, the working subtitle of the book that I'm writing is called How Overcoming Obstacles Became a Habit. Because that's really what happened in my life, is that when you start a company and you're undercapitalized from the beginning, then you're always overcoming obstacles as you create the business. And after you do it for a number of years, it literally becomes a habit. I am very comfortable overcoming obstacles. There's no obstacle that makes me throw my hands up in despair. In fact, when there aren't obstacles, I sometimes am a little bit perplexed as to what I should be doing, because I like overcoming obstacles. Now, for your question about momentum, I think this is about corporate culture. We know what momentum is in sports, but in a business, if you've got a powerful corporate culture that is alive, I think that can become the source and engine of the momentum in your business.
And do you create momentum? Do you create that?
Do I personally? I've been known to, I think.
Yeah. How would somebody go about creating momentum?
I think the best way to create momentum is to think with your heart, not just with your head, and be more authentic and human-like, and people will respond.
Well, that warms my heart because I believe in humanizing businesses. But going a step back now, we're talking about taking a business to a level that's online that dehumanizes perhaps maybe connections. Eventually we have Oculus Rift, we've got virtual reality, we have demand on demand, we have 3D printing that could potentially create clothing on demand. You can print out your clothes, go out that night, so on and so forth. How will businesses remain human?
Well, you know, there is a commercial running now in the Bay Area for a company called M. Taylor, and it's an app for custom shirts using a iPhone photograph. A lot of people that I work with are concerned about that, and I've explained that that type of technology will work for a shirt, but you're never going to get a suit simply with a photograph. And in fact, I really believe that the reason why only 10% of apparel sales are done online is because people like to touch the material and they like to have a certain type of fit, whether it's a pair of jeans or a business suit. So one of our sister companies was a company called Z Taylor, which has been struggling, but which is an attempt to solve the problem of fit in the online world.
So how is this next? How does the next 5 years look for you?
Well, I've got the tuxedo and suit part down pretty well in my new company. The products are really nice. Most people who are wearing it are raving about it. But I still have a lot to learn when it comes to digital marketing and what technology can do. I was not an early advocate of cell phones, so I am catching up a bit.
But you have your cell phone on you right now, correct?
I do. It's in my pocket, but
I'm surprised you're not holding it.
well, because we're on stage, I thought
okay.
I'd put it in my pocket and turn the ringer off. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years, and that is assuming that Donald Trump doesn't get elected. I mean, that would change things, but assuming that, I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years.
There are so many ways I could go now. But I won't.
We talked backstage, and there are probably some Trump people in the audience, and I apologize, but I am a New York businessman that can smell another New York businessman.
Alrighty then, that's a great place. No, I'm kidding. So let's talk about patriotism,
Yes.
millionaire patriotism.
Yes.
This is a thing. Talk to me about that.
So I'm a member of an organization that has the second worst marketing name in history. The first being the chosen people, which is what the Jews have referred to themselves for years. But the second worst name is the Patriotic Millionaires, which is what I'm a member of. And it's simply a group of men and women who have been fortunate and blessed in our economy, who understand that the increasing inequality is not good for any of us. And so we're doing things politically and otherwise to try to bring to consciousness the fact that something has to be done about increasing inequality.
Wow. Wow. Have you always been, how have you weaved in these kinds of things, being the face of a company such as Men's Wearhouse? Where do you walk that line of where you're going to choose to stand for something like that and where you're not?
Well, that's a personal stance, income inequality. That's not connected to Generation Tux and certainly not connected to Men's Wearhouse. If I can just slip this story in here.
Please.
So for the 20 years Men's Wearhouse was a public company, I donated my compensation every year, which was about $600,000, to a family foundation which provided college scholarships to children of Men's Wearhouse employees.
Wow.
Over the 20 years, that added up to about $10 million. The man that fired me 2.5 years ago, in 2015, paid himself $10 million, just a FYI. I think that's an interesting juxtaposition.
Wow.
And, you know, it speaks right to the income inequality that this country is facing. In fact, that Frenchman that wrote that book on capital a couple of years ago points out that if something is not done about income inequality soon, we are going to have a hereditary aristocracy by the end of the century, much like we fought the English in the Revolution for. So that's the direction we're moving.
Curious, if you had to look at everything that you've done, you get to take all the knowledge with you, but you have to start over tomorrow. The one thing you don't get to take with you is the money. What would you do?
Well, I tell all young people I meet that I'd be glad to swap their age for my money like that. I'm not even, not even a momentary hesitation. You know, back in the, when I started Men's, many of my friends got into real estate and into technology, and they all actually, not all, but many of them did financially far better than I did, being just a schmuck salesman. You know, if I could do it all over again, and this is not really a fair comment because I've learned in my life, but I think I would do something that was not about making money. I think I would be a teacher, or I would be a mentor, or I would work with handicapped kids. I think that's an aspect of life that I've shortchanged in this incarnation.
Wow. So, actually, last question here is about ethics. Let's talk about the ethics of business as it's changed over the years, how you've seen it change, and where it's at now. What are we faced with when it comes to ethical discussions in business?
Well, it's I can give you an expanded answer because my grandfather was one of the founders of something in New York called the Ethical Culture Society, which still exists, but has not really become anything that anybody is aware of. My mother went to a ethical culture high school called Fieldston in New York City. But as a prelude to your question, the ethics when I started in 73 were far from religious or saintly, but they were much more powerful than the ethics are today. I believe that there is something called the Commons, that whether it's the Boston Commons in Boston or just all the things that as citizens of America we share in common, that should become a larger part of our life, and our personal fortunes and jet airplanes should take a smaller role. So I think that's why I made my political comment. It'll only get worse if that happens.
It certainly sounds like there are some big changes coming, and some great ways that you're supporting, your beliefs. I know I said last question, but I've got one last question.
Okay.
Final question is, how do you look at your own personal brand? How do you see yourself? If you look back, or your kids look back and they describe who you were, who is that?
I like to say that I'm the accidental brand, meaning that I was just George, and I did things like smoked marijuana and told people I did, and the brand that I developed is really just who I am. And one of the things that has been said before is that if you always speak the truth, then you never are wondering what you told somebody, because you know what the story of your life is. And maybe because my memory's not as good as it used to be, I like to always speak the truth.
That's a great way to be. Well, George, you have changed many lives and done so many great things, and I'm honored to be sitting here with you and having this conversation.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.